what if my life was more integrated? What if there was a better blend?
Right.
What if there was better harmony?
It's not that long ago that we didn't have cell phones.
Right.
Right.
There was a time when you left work.
Right.
They couldn't reach you.
Oh, I'm checking all the boxes. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And then for me, like over time, it has just completely shifted to how do I feel?
A lot of people think that there should be an equal 50-50 split where there should be, 50%, my personal time, 50% my work time. But all of that just creates really unrealistic expectations and can absolutely lead to burnout.
Hey, everyone, and welcome back to the Living Richly podcast. We're so excited that you've joined us again this week for another great conversation. And today we're going to be talking about something that I think most people struggle with. And
Not us,
but other people.
Never us.
We've heard
We've
some
heard.
people.
We're going to be talking as master gurus to the subject matter of something we feel we've completely conquered. But the title of the episode is actually Rejecting Work-Life Balance Bullshit, Finding Sanity Beyond the Scale. And I want to jump right in to say if there was one major myth you could bust about the whole notion of work-life balance, what would it be?
That it's balanced. I mean, it's
And show's over.
Thanks for tuning in.
But that's it. It's never balanced. There's never, your life is never in this perfect harmony. We all picture the scale when we hear that. And it's just never like that. I used to always call it work-life blend. So how does it weave in? You're just never going to be perfectly evenly spending your time with all the places or all the people you want to.
Right.
Yeah. I think you explain that really well, because a lot of people think that there should be an equal 50-50 split where there should be, 50%, my personal time, 50% my work time. But all of that just creates really unrealistic expectations and can absolutely lead to burnout.
Yeah, totally.
I think one of the myths that, and I actually just heard this with I was doing a team training recently, and one of the guys that was in this team training, an older gentleman, probably my age.
You mean really?
He was like, kids these days, right? But he made the comment. He said, he says, this is a new thing. Like, we never had to worry about work-life balance. Like it's, and he wasn't looking at it as it was an issue with society. He was basically saying kids these days, that it's a problem with millennials or whatever. They're making up this notion of that it is even an issue. And I challenged him and said, you go back to the 50s, the 60s, it's not that long ago that we didn't have cell phones. Right.
Right.
There was a time when you left work.
Right.
They couldn't reach you. There was no email. There was no, unless they phoned your house number, they couldn't reach you.
Remember landlines? Anybody here remember landlines?
I remember.
Rotary dial.
Rotary dial. Oh my God.
I lived in a community where I had a party line.
Oh, party.
Yeah.
Great. You could listen
in.
You
could
could
listen in.
yeah.
But for today, the reason why this is such a relevant topic is because we don't shut off. We are always available 24/7 for our workplace, for our friends, family, everyone. You can't get away from it unless you choose to. I shouldn't say you can't. You can, but unless you choose to. I think that's a big myth.
Yeah, absolutely. I often talk about work-life harmony. I love the work-life blend. Yeah. I'm actually moving towards work-life integration because I like the word integration much better. But harmony, there's a sense of balance. Again, it's got to be perfectly, both my personal life, my professional life have to be in perfect sync, right? I have always get this image of the guy who used to walk across Niagara Falls on a high wire right, with the pole, and like one wrong move and he could fall to his death. Like that's how it feels to me. And yet harmony, you think of an orchestra where they're playing this beautiful piece of music. Not all the instruments get to play all the same notes and have equal playtime. Think of the poor guy on the triangle who might get one moment of hurrah right when he hits his triangle. But when all those instruments are coming together the way they're meant to, there's harmony. Yeah. You can tell. And when something's out of harmony, you can also hear it and you can adjust it. But there's this notion here.
I'm glad you didn't use the example of cowbell.
Well, we always need more cowbell. I thought they made that pretty clear on Saturday Night Live years ago.
To just continue on that thought for a second, you said something before the show when you and I were talking, which I thought was brilliant. When you use the example of balance with the person, you know, in the doctor's office, where you're standing on that scale and they're literally tapping that to get it just perfect, and just 1 pound off,
right,
and the scale starts to tip. And
would you tap that?
Horrible way! No, I'm not doing that. Not going there. What a horrible way to live your life.
Right.
Where if you're trying, if you're aiming for balance, it takes just one little fraction of something happening, and
you're off balance, and you lose your grounding. The other thing I would say is if we're busting myths here, is that not all hours are created equal.
100%.
Not all days are created equal.
Totally.
Not all weeks, months, seasons of our lives are created equal. So to think that we can achieve balance is actually, we talk about unhealthy expectations. The language itself sets us up for failure and frustration because it's actually not achievable. When we start to reframe it, all of a sudden we start to say, what if my life was more integrated? What if there was a better blend?
Right.
What if there was better harmony? Right?
Well, and I think the expectations we put on ourselves, you know, when we get frustrated, it's often because our expectations are that it should be this, it should be 50-50, where some days it's going to be more of a personal life, you know, where you're spending more time on your personal life, and other days it might be more work. So maybe it's 70-30, maybe it's 60-40, and it doesn't have to be the same. But in our heads, you know, we constantly think that, no, it has to be 50-50 or it's not balanced, but balance might be 70-30.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, can you guys share perhaps a personal story or something you went through that made you start to question the traditional model of work-life balance as we know it?
Yeah. COVID.
Right. That changed everything.
What was that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right. COVID.
When was that? COVID. I mean, when COVID hit, I was already working from home Monday, Friday. So I was only in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And I had asked for that because my commute at that point was over 2 hours a day, and I was getting exhausted by it. So I had already started to kind of lean into that more. But when COVID hit and we're all working from home, for me, it was just eye-opening to be like, okay, like we can all work remotely. We can all get our jobs done. In fact, we were working even harder being at home. Yeah. But what my eyes got open to was, I can throw a little laundry in and I'm home. I was regaining those 2 hours a day in my commute. I was able to spend more time with my kids. I could prep dinner. We were eating better. Like there were just all these benefits because I wasn't spending all of this time in my car. So for me, that was like, I would say a big one where I was like, oh, okay, I can do things differently. And I really like this way a whole lot better.
Right. And yet for a lot of people during COVID, when we were working, many of us were working from home that could work from home. Yeah. Many described the fact that now that they had lost the commute, they didn't have an automatic off switch, or there was the day's over, now I'm heading home. It was like the days and evenings would just blend in together. And so that caused a lot of people to actually be more out of balance and harmony than before. So it's interesting how the same set of circumstances can have a different impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right?
I would say, so in my HR days, I supported a very large organization, and two of my main businesses were the biggest parts of the business, and they were both 24/7 operations. And so I distinctly remember, when you're asking, when did I question, this, I remember this like it just happened yesterday. I was sitting at the dining room table trying to fix payroll issues at 8:30 at night and deal with an employee that had a lot of personal issues and mental health stuff. Wow. Meanwhile, my husband at the time was reading stories to the kids upstairs for their bedtime. And I'm getting an email from somebody very high up in the organization saying, I don't care what you got going on. This is a priority. Like, this needs to be fixed. It needs to be done now. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, and I can't go back and get story time with my kids again. Right. But I can obviously show up differently now. But I remember that, like, what the fuck am I doing?
Yeah. It's coming up against the extremes of work encroaching too much into important moments of our lives, right?
And not having boundaries.
And not having,
feeling
it's a great podcast. And I think that podcast did a show on boundaries.
Yeah, I think it's called, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's called the Living Richly podcast.
Oh,
and you know what? It has these two couples on there. They're the hosts with the most. Like, they're just the best.
And some Steve guy.
Steve.
Hey.
Oh, wait, that's us.
Oh, wow.
Oh, a little bit of self-promotion.
Yeah. For me, it was interesting. And you and I have, of course, very similar backgrounds. Like our work-life balance, we were competing with God, right? Like,
no, we were working for God.
but the balance part was competing with God in the sense
Can
that
I just say, and at the risk of offending every religious person who's listening to the show, he wasn't a very good boss.
No, he wasn't. Yeah, because it was this notion of the idea that you would even say, well, I have to be here for my family when there's a greater calling.
Saving the world.
We're saving the world. And so this notion of, you were on all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You were out, I can remember, like, again, I never went to parent teacher interviews. I never did, my kids would be doing some performance and maybe I'd get there, but maybe there was a God thing I needed to do. Right. And I remember even one year, somebody had brought something over, kind of given a bit of a donation to us as a family, some treats or something like that. And I was giving them to the kids and I said, this is the burden you carry is as a pastor's kid is dad is out doing things for God and you get sometimes these special treats because that's how God blesses you for that. What a warped idea is that, right? Like, what a warped idea that
they're in therapy now, aren't they?
Yeah, yes, they are. We talked about it many times, right? So I think for me, when that realization didn't happen until I stepped away from the church and I looked back and realized how fucked up was it that I believed that so genuinely because of a belief system.
Yeah, I mean, and I can so relate to that. I mean, I would say if we're using the word harmony over balance, I was out of harmony, I think, most of my adult life until a few years ago. We used the model that emerged for me after my great awakening in 2022. I talked about this model of radical self-acceptance, that we really have to start there. And once we make some headway there, we never completely cracked that one, but once we make some significant headway there, then all of a sudden radical self-care becomes within reach. For me, I don't know how many times people told me over the years, Deschamps, get a hobby, like slow the fuck down. And I'd look at them like confused saying, there's no time for a hobby. Like there's people to save, there's people to help, like, and of course the religious piece on top of that about self-sacrifice and dying to self and crucifying the self. Like it's all this language that any self at all is like a major sin. And so I was completely out of balance but radical self-care, then when you begin to invest more into that, then it allows you to experience radical self-actualization, becoming the best version of you, right? But my story was like, instead of radical self-acceptance, it was like deep self-loathing, right? Instead of radical self-care, it was like running on fumes. And instead of radical self-actualization, it was more like partial activation.
Yeah.
And so this need for balance, we're not arguing on the show today that we don't need to have proper boundaries and make sure that we have harmony in our lives. What we're trying to dispel is this myth of balance that, again, sets us up for frustration and failure because it's actually really, really hard to achieve. But, right?
I was just going to say how interesting that you brought up get a hobby. But it's so when you create or when you're immersed so much in what you're doing, we've all kind of shared that. I've had so many people say to me, hobby? The fuck do you want me to do? Like, well, a hobby, like, what do I do? Because people just don't know and they can't wrap their head around, okay, finding something. How do I find something? What do I like to do? And I think it takes a long time to kind of go back to the roots of when you were a child to really sit and figure out what are your passions? What makes me it's hard for people. And then when you start to do things to learn to turn your mind off on actually enjoying that and be able to. So I love that you mentioned hobby because I think there's a lot of people that are like, I don't know what that means for me. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, or they think a hobby is a waste of time versus like recharging. Yes. People see it as
or guilt.
Right. Or like, what what am I going to do over here? What's that serving? What's that giving me? Right.
Yeah.
Without thinking about what it can recharge you with. People are like, I don't have time for that.
I should be doing.
I should be. Right.
Well, I
All
would
those
say,
shoulds.
I would say even the hobby language is problematic. Like, and in my own journey and my work with leaders, often if I'm sensing a leader is spending way too much time investing in their leadership and business and their life is suffering, I'll explore more. What are some things you love to do?
Right.
When you say you need to find a hobby, that's like you're saying to someone, you need to get married. Okay. Like this notion of you want me to decide on a hobby and I haven't even tried it to know if I like it or not.
Right.
So rather than finding a hobby, which is this big commitment, I say experiment with things that you enjoy or might enjoy. And some of those things might turn into a hobby. But using that language again is problematic. Like language is everything. It really does shift the narrative.
Oh, no. Well, and you've used this language in the past around, again, that idea that, the getting the hobby, right? It's the checklist. It becomes another thing to do versus when you shift the language, shift the narrative to what are things that you really enjoy doing. Now it's not it takes it out of the, I have to do this, or it takes it out of the, this is another task that I have to add to my list. No, this is now this is passion. This is enjoyment. And you're able to change how people shift and how they see those things.
Right. Let's talk about shift the conversation a bit. Let's talk about where this a traditional approach to work-life balance came from, which is actually based on the traditional work week, right? That we have come to know and accept, and I know a lot of that is shifting and changing. But the 5-day work week, the 40-hour work week, like that has been with us. I was surprised to find out that its origins is actually you have to go back to Henry Ford over 100 years ago in the 1920s. Yes. Wow. I know. Math is hard for me today.
Math.
In the 1920s. So before he instituted or introduced what was revolutionary at the time, a real game changer, it was a 60-hour work week. It was a 6-day work week. And his notion or his idea was that if we give people more time off, if we reduce the work week to 5 days, 40 hours, one, they're going to be more productive because they're more rested. And two, they'll have more free time to actually take their dollars, invest them back into the economy.
Right.
And it turns out it was a game changer, but it was resisted at the beginning big time, right? You were talking about an article you read recently.
Yeah, well, you're right. It was resisted. It took about 10, 15 years for most companies to embrace the model. And then in the States, it became law. In the late 30s or the mid 30s, they actually, because of the resistance of some who said, again, they have to be here, they have to work, we have to produce, and not looking at the stats and not looking at the numbers. They finally had to make it a law in order to force people to do it. Interesting that we see, if we fast forward to today, we're seeing what's one of the laws that is being pushed through a lot of governments right now is the turn off technology law, right? The idea that you can't expect your employee to answer an email at 8 p.m. or 10 p.m.
To fix a payroll issue
or
at 8:30 p.m.
Right. To say this is the priority over your kids reading your kids a bedtime story. That we've come now to where we're now instituting those laws. We're also seeing a lot of countries, we're seeing it in Switzerland and New Zealand, a number of these countries that are now moving to the 4-day work week. We all know that and enjoy it, but moving to the 4-day work week because they're recognizing the power of that. I was thinking when we were talking about this earlier, the notion of when you think before the Industrial Revolution, when in the 20s, when we went to Henry Ford and all of this stuff, people were, whether they were farmers or whatever they're doing, you talk to somebody in the 1910 about work-life balance or whatever, and they would look at you like you were crazy because, right? You would be like, you manage things, you did your stuff, your hobby, right? If you were a farmer in the middle of the day.
If you're a farmer, you probably didn't have hobbies.
Well,
let's be fair.
Well, but they did though. They did. They in the evenings, they'd sit out by the campfire, wood, whatever.
Is that what they did? Yeah.
What they did.
Rob is totally making this shit up right now on the fly. This is
hilarious.
Enough.
We're going to have to start putting disclaimers on the show. The opinions expressed by the following participant.
If you say it enough, it's true.
All I can picture now is like people whittling.
We're all going to make that work-life balance. If you're not whittling, you're not doing it right.
I do that. I sit on my front porch and as I whittle a new whistle.
Right.
Oh my God.
But the point is like we've built this notion around, or this belief around what work-life balance looks like. And it's based on a model that is over 100 years old, right? It's over a century old. And yet we continue to try to, like create these, artificial Chinese walls between our personal and professional lives. Like if the two ever come into contact with each other, that somehow we've committed the cardinal sin. And now with 4-day work weeks, I mean, I know you guys do that at Bold Lip. We do it at Rap. You guys instituted that recently.
In the fall, we implemented in September for everyone. And it's been like, we used to have quiet Fridays. So no meeting Fridays, focus Fridays. A lot of organizations do it. And then we did a pilot and we launched it, and it's honestly, it's working so amazingly well. We are more efficient, but I always say this, we're very busy Monday to Thursday. Like our days are full. We do not put in 40 hours in 4 days. That's not what we all signed up for. But our days are full, and it's amazing how much more productive you are, because when you have Friday, often on a Thursday, you'll be like, oh, I'll just get to it tomorrow.
Yeah.
But instead you wrap up your day on a Thursday, and we take Fridays off, and then we all come back on Monday, that extra day to recharge, to like a lot of us, what do? We get our stuff done. We're running errands. We do appointments. It has just made such a difference in our mental health, and also just how productive we are.
So how did that start? Like because I'm just thinking there's probably people listening that are like, well, that's great for you guys, but how do I do that in my organization? So I'm just curious, like, was it somebody or a group of you that said like, hey, let's try this out?
Yeah, we actually did a whole, we have like a couple of blogs on why and how it's working for us. And I think when I joined, part of me joining was I was working a 4-day work week. That was part of my agreement when I signed up. They were already on Focus Fridays. And then we just started talking about it. And as a team, some of our junior staff were like, we're really interested in maybe working a 4-day work week. Mm-hmm. So it got brought up, but they were also thinking about it. Carolyn and Joe, my business partners, were thinking about it as well. And so we're like, why don't we try it? Like, what have we got to lose to try it? Yeah. And we all agreed it would be a pilot. That was to see how it went. And we talked it out. Like, don't get me wrong, there's some bumps and things you got to work through. We had to revisit how we schedule meetings and when we schedule meetings, when is focus down, when is creative working time, and how we went and we source feedback from clients. So it was a group discussion. But definitely, there wasn't one person who wasn't.
No, and I love that. I think for people that are listening, and all it takes is for one person to go first to be like, hey, have we explored this? And instead of just, well, that'll never, that's not going to work here. Yeah. How do you know until you actually start having discussions about it and coming forward to your organization with solutions and options?
The research is there. Absolutely.
More countries experimenting with it.
We know it works, and we know people are more productive when
those crazy Icelanders, right?
Right.
Last year I read the stat. This was, so it's probably changed since then, but I think 83% of the workforce last year in Iceland was either on a 4-day work week or was transitioning to a 4-day work week. And they're seeing all kinds of benefits as a result. It doesn't work for everybody, but whether it's a 4-day work week, we instituted it, 3 years ago?
No, I remember exactly when it was, and you led the charge on this. It was right as we were coming out of and yes, it was in 2021, the summer of 2021. Yeah. We had come out of COVID, and our team had compassion fatigue. Right. We had dealt with so many heavy conversations, and we were recognizing, and just like you guys, it was a trial. It was let's do this for the summer. Yep. And September came along, and we were like, let's not go back. Right. And so we made the decision, and again, we have independent coaches that work with us. So we just said to them, this is what we're doing. The office is doing this. So just whatever you want to do. What's radical now, and it's messy when we start this stuff, is now people are challenging even the traditional 9 to 5.
Sure.
Right. Because again, that made sense when you were on you're building a car and you were on this industrial line. it doesn't make sense so much today with a lot of organizations. And there's a lot of pushback. I want you to be available when I need to, right? Trying to figure out meetings and all this.
Yeah.
But we're starting to see more and more companies contemplate the idea of saying you can work whatever hours work. If you're a night person, you want to work till 3 a.m, as long as your work is done, we're good.
I saw a great post on LinkedIn just yesterday, and the guy is standing there holding a sign of things he no longer wants to hear from his employees, right? And it says, I need to leave early because my child's got a concert. I need to run out to a medical appointment. And this list of all things that are just normal life things. And so at first you think he's being a real asshole, right? But actually at the bottom of this poster, it says, because I fundamentally trust you. I hired you to do a job and I fundamentally trust you to do it. And I thought that was brilliant because beyond the 4-day work week, that's certainly a model that's emerging more and more. The hybrid model, of course, I don't think if it wasn't for COVID, we wouldn't be embracing it the way that we have.
Not this quickly.
Not this quickly. I think COVID probably fast-tracked that by 10 or 20 years.
Agree.
Even the wide adoption of things like Zoom and Teams, Microsoft Teams and everything else, most people didn't know how to do that. And that technology certainly took off really, really fast and was embraced by most of the population because we had to. But this notion of working, it has to be a traditional 9 to 5. Like at the end of the day, it doesn't actually respect people's productivity. It doesn't respect people's flow. I get that it's hard to mobilize an entire workforce when everyone's kind of doing their own thing. But there is a movement away from the traditional model, right? And it's interesting to watch I don't know if you guys are seeing, I know we certainly are seeing it, the battle between trying to reinstate what the workforce looked like or the workplace looked like pre-COVID, and employees resisting being pushed back to work 5 days a week. It's a real thing.
Well, and it's some of the decisions you question, like I'm happy to be out of that space and able to carve out my own schedule. But I see it with friends of mine who work for the federal government in particular, who are now going back 3 days a week, and it's going up. I think it's going up even more. And there's a lot of pushback, and a lot of the pushback is I go in and there's no one around me. So why am I here? So it's those conversations of pushing people back. I think if there was a good why, and I'm not suggesting it's every department everywhere, but I do think if people understand, like explain to me the purpose of me being in the office. Is it to collaborate? Great. Is it to have meetings face to face? But if you're going in or you're going to a remote location and you're sitting at a cubby, what's the difference from that or you being home? So I think people are just questioning what's the value of me necessarily having to be in the office.
Yeah. And there's certainly lots of pushback, especially we are in Ottawa, Canada's capital, and of course have a huge swath of population work for the feds. And right now there's a push from pushing everybody back to 3 days a week at the office in September. I think executives are going to be required to go back 4 days a week. So there's a lot of battle going back and forth. The dust has yet to settle. But the point is the workplace has changed and we need to adopt our view of how integrating work and life goes. There's a great model. I read a book probably going on a couple years ago now by Dan Siegel called Mindsight. And he introduces this great model of imagine yourself on a river and you're floating on a river on this raft. And you're in the flow. Rob,
I'm imagining.
Rob's rolling down the river.
I'd like to be on a river. Oh, there we go.
There we go. A little Clearwater revival. Let's maybe we can get that playing in the background while I explain the rest of this. But this whole notion of being in the flow, and for him being in the flow, that word stands for flexibility, love, openness, and wholeheartedness. Right. So he says that's how we want to be living our lives. But on either side of that river are riverbanks. One of the riverbanks is chaos, complete disorder. Okay. The other side is rigidity. It's everything is too set in stone. Any one of those riverbanks is a problem. And what I loved about his approach is it kind of freed me from this notion of I have to have it all figured out and it has to look work-life balance or work-life harmony has to look a certain way all the time. I've come to actually, it's not about how much time am I spending somewhere. It's more about my internal state. Am I feeling flexible? Am I living with love? Am I more open? Am I wholehearted, or am I half-hearted, or am I partially hearted? Those are the things that are signs to me that I probably something is off that I need to adjust. But what do you guys think about this whole notion of rigidity versus chaos? Too much freedom, too much lack of boundaries or whatever. And like he says, that's unhealthy. Whereas on the other side, too many boundaries and you might be setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tricky.
Right.
It's tricky. I mean, I look at, you talk about the younger generation coming into a workforce and what they're looking for. And they're looking for a whole lot of things that, even with I don't feel like I'm that old, but there's times where I'm like, wow, you're like, what you're looking for to me doesn't exist, right? And they're not wrong for thinking it or wanting it, but they're wanting that flexibility. They're wanting to work whatever hours they want to work. They want to take as many vacation days as they want. They want to take as many 6 days. And the old school person in me is like, well, you got to go to work. It's like, what are you talking about?
Oh, that's going to stick.
I know.
We got to work. I got to go.
I'm like,
That's
what?
awesome.
Yeah. And then part of me is like, loves it. Cause I'm like, what an incredible way, to live your life, to be able to work and enjoy work, but also live life and not have work be like this huge burden. But for me, I'll be honest, it's been like a really interesting dynamic when you're hiring younger generation to come to work. There's always I get in this dichotomy of really supporting it, and part of me has this weird old person reaction.
Right. Well, I mean, we haven't even talked about that. We talked about how the workplace has changed. We've talked about how the work week has changed. Generationally, I believe the stats support this. About 75% of the workforce currently are millennials, and part of the millennial pushback has been they watched how hard we push ourselves and how hard we work, often to the point of it being very unhealthy and unbalanced or out of harmony. And they've said, don't want that.
Well,
right?
and I think it's like anything. We see this often in culture, the pendulum swing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we at some point we're going to find that middle ground. I agree with you that we are seeing right now with a lot of younger people, this pushback saying, no, I want everything on my terms. And that's just the pendulum swinging from what it was, where you had no options. You just went to, you don't want to work 9 to 5. You don't want to do this.
Fired.
You're fired.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To now
I tried to fire you this morning.
Yeah. Yeah. But good luck on
You're
that.
still here.
Here he is.
I keep showing
You
up.
just keep showing
Hi, it's me.
Hi.
Yeah, it was a little awkward the other day at 2 a.m, looking over your bed. Going,
Hi. Yeah, more awkward than you know.
But that pendulum swing, and at some point, I think there will find that. But I think it's a good pushback because it's forcing employers to ask those questions.
Yeah.
We look at we know why the federal government is pushing people back to work, certainly here in Ottawa, because we're seeing this across many places. The downtown has been decimated with people coming out of it. And we also know that the downtown of every city, it's the heartbeat of a city. And if your downtown falls apart, it doesn't take long for the rest of the city to fall apart.
Yeah.
So I get why they're doing it. They're not explaining it well. And the logic behind it is sometimes a little bit flawed. And I think that's what's happening is the millennials are pushing, not just millennials, but younger people are pushing against the notions and forcing employers to go, well, why does it make sense that I expect you to work 9 to 5, or I expect you to work in the office when you're like, it's getting us to rethink the logic behind why we do these things.
And talk about pendulum swing. I was listening to a podcast yesterday where what's being reported now in the workplace, and it's happening more and more, is when talk about from the younger generations going way too far with it, is like going for performance evaluation and getting perhaps some feedback that you need to grow in some areas, and like young people calling their parents and asking them to talk to their boss. Like, right? Like
Wow.
Old person back here. I can't.
right? Yeah. What? What? Well, so we know who our demographic is. Our demographic is mostly people our age when we look at all the statistics, but there's always that pendulum swing, and it often over rotates at the beginning. And then eventually, hopefully it finds that more central place. But I think what I'm advocating for is embracing fluidity. fluidity, embracing flexibility. I think I like the term boundaries because we do need to set some clear boundaries in our relationships and our personally, professionally, like that's important. But the word boundary itself is very rigid, and it can encourage a rigid approach to life. And I think what was it we talked about? We all know about IQ, right? IQ is your intelligence quotient, and how you talk about how things have changed in the workforce. It used to be your IQ was everything, right? You'd get hired for your IQ, and then they discovered that there's really intelligent people who are really bad with people, right? Yeah. They're really smart, but they're not very good at managing people. And it was Dan Goleman who created the whole model around emotional intelligence, which is now called EQ oftentimes, right? Referring to your ability to self-regulate, manage your emotions better, connect, show empathy, all those things. And that's been part of the workforce now I know a lot of leaders that will hire for EQ over IQ any day. Yeah. But in the last decade or so, what we're seeing is now a push for AQ, which is your adaptability quotient, your ability to flex with the situation, your ability to adapt. Why? The workplace and the world is changing so fast compared to how it used to. Yeah. Even now, we're just talking generational differences. Do you know that earlier on, like when we talked about the builders, which would have been like our grandparents' generation, and to boomers, which would have been the generation that followed, there was a 40-year gap between those two generations. Now we're talking about the difference between millennials and I forget what is it, Gen Z? No, it's not Gen X or Gen Z, maybe.
Gen Z, I don't know.
I don't know. I'm not remembering in this moment, but we're talking now a decade. So the differences now, everything is speeding up. Everything is shifting faster. And I think a rigid approach to life, I'm not advocating for chaos because chaos is chaos, but I think there's some of us and maybe some folks that are listening that could benefit from learning to embrace a little more chaos in their lives and learning to flow with it as opposed to fighting it. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Again, without boundaries, the river has no focus.
Right.
It overflows. It becomes a swamp. It becomes a swamp, or it becomes a disaster. Right. And we see flooding happen and everything. When the river overrides the boundaries, the banks, all of a sudden there's destruction. And so I think finding that flow between the rigidity and the chaos is what there's so much that we can lean into when it comes to what a river is. I think that's absolutely right. You have to embrace both. Yeah. It's the not one or, it's the both and when it comes to chaos and rigidity, and finding how you flow with both of those putting pressure on you.
Yeah, and even in Dan Siegel's model, it goes, if you're flowing down a river and there's riverbanks, well, you're not always perfectly in the middle of the river. So again, he's blowing out of the water, literally blowing out of the water. The notion river is blowing out of the water. Did you guys catch that?
Oh yeah, we got it.
All right,
we got it.
If you have to explain it.
I made myself laugh.
Everybody knows.
I know. I do that all the time. But he was blowing out of the water, literally the whole notion of balance, right? Because it's never, you're doing this as you're going down the river. So sometimes you might be edging closer to rigidity. Sometimes you're edging closer to chaos, but it's embracing that. I love I remember first being introduced years ago to the concept of, the Buddhist concept of impermanence, where everything is impermanent. And they will literally, Buddhist monks, I don't know if you've ever seen this, they make these beautiful they're not drawings, but they make these beautiful works of art out of sand, different colored sand, and they arrange it, and it takes them forever to do this, and they create these very elaborate designs with grains of colored sand. And when they're finished, they just blow it all away to remind themselves that everything changes, nothing stays the same,
I love it.
Everything's impermanent. And I think we try to there's a lot of control behind. Oh, let's talk about control for a moment, shall we? There's a lot of control, I think, that goes into work-life balance, unhealthy control of trying to control the world around us. Fight me on it.
Well, I think one dynamic we haven't talked about when it comes to control is like the two parent working family scenario. And I'm thinking about your river, and I'm thinking about there's, if you have a 2-parent household and there's 2 of you going down this river, you're bouncing off each other, let alone like left and right side. Right.
Right.
And so I think like
you're sometimes pushing each other into chaos or rigidity.
You are. And I think finding work-life balance in that context is really hard too. So it's not the traditional model of, a woman staying home, taking care of the kids, husband goes off to work. That has shifted so much, and that has shifted the dynamic and also pushed us to need more of that work-life blend and how that looks. But I think control can come into that too, where it's like, okay, what's my role? What's your role? Can you take the kid to the doctor? Am I going to the dentist? Okay. Are you doing so it's not just like the work-life balance necessarily for yourself. It's also that work-life balance. And how does that affect your partner if you have a partner at home? Like figuring that out, there's control that flies through that constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's also the notion of, again, when we're not clear on what we value, what we stand for, we're going to get tossed around an awful lot, right? We get pulled along by the musts, the shoulds, the have tos. We refer to that a lot on this show about showing up as your most authentic self. I think it's very hard to find any kind of harmony in life if your inner world is out of harmony. I actually think most of what we blame the external world for when we say we're out of balance or we're out of harmony is because of internal disharmony. We're not in harmony with ourselves. We haven't gotten clear. We're not sure who we are. We don't know what we stand for. We're not sure what we value. We're just living life according to somebody else's blueprint and wondering why we're unhappy, right? And I think true resilience, if a person is more grounded, and grounded is a word that I like a lot more than balance, because grounded means my 2 feet firmly planted on the ground and I can stand firm, right? As opposed to this balancing act where I'm maybe standing on I don't know. I always, the other image I get is of a clown at a circus, and they would stand on a board that was on a ball. Did you ever see that, right? And they're trying to balance on this, right? Well, I'd rather be grounded because that just sounds dangerous. And given how clumsy I am,
I was going to say, you'd be the first to go down.
I am a menace to myself and others, but this notion of getting clear on who I am, what I stand for. So, and that leads us to our first set of questions that as we're preparing for the show, and folks, this is going to be a 2-part show. We as we were preparing and discussing, we just realized we want to take our time with this, because there's just so much great content, and there's a list of questions that we came up with that we're going to kind of throw back and forth here, and we're going to get just into a few of them, and the rest of them will belong in part 2 of this, which will come next week. But this first notion, talking about who we are and what matters most, is the question of how do you define success in both your work and in your personal life? Like, we have society's version of what success looks like, but how do you define it?
Yeah. So I think having that feeling of both fulfillment and contentment. So am I fulfilled? Am I content? And how do the two blend in together? So in my work, for me, it's about making a positive.
I'm just breaking this down. Sorry about that.
Kate's just.
Steve's like, shh.
In my work, it's about creating positive impact.
Right.
Being able to feel very passionate about what I do, serving others. In my personal life, success is about nurturing relationships that are, irreplaceable to me, valuable to me, taking care of me, prioritizing that self-care, and being able to have a mix of both of those things.
Yes, I love that definition, because you talk about in your work feeling impact, feeling like you're making a difference. And I think there's an awful lot of folks that are going to a dead-end job, going nowhere, and they look for all of their fulfillment outside of it. And I get we're all going to go through seasons, most of us, especially in the earlier stages of your career. There is something about paying your dues and earning sort of a bigger platform to pursue the things that are more important to you. I think that gets taken too far. But I think a lot of folks are in unhappy jobs. How many people do we know that I've heard this time and time again? I remember meeting with one leader who was like 20 years away from retirement from the federal government, and he hates his job and he's miserable, but he's hanging on for this future date of his pension, and yet is living miserable in the meantime. And we spend on average, again, if we go back to the traditional work week, right, we spend on average 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, or 40 hours a week, 5 days a week on the job. Was it Tiffany Westerman, who was here not long ago? That was a phenomenal interview.
Yeah, great interview.
She opens with, if you don't like your job, like, quit and find a new one. And her notion was, don't be irresponsible about that, but don't stay in a job where you're unhappy, because how can you find balance if 8 hours of your day or a significant part of your week is spent doing something you don't love, or that you don't enjoy, or you're not getting some level of fulfillment out of, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I know for me, I think if I think how it used to be to where I am today, like success for me was always around the accolades. It was always like doing really well, getting promoted, if I think about the work environment. And then at home, it was like, oh, you're a great mom. You've lost the baby weight. How do you manage with 3 small kids? Like, just all of that used to be like that. Oh, I'm checking all the boxes. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And then for me, like over time, it has just completely shifted to, how do I feel?
Right.
So if I'm in a job, how do I feel? To your point, staying stuck. If I don't feel good in this job, if I'm not feeling fulfilled, why am I still here? It's the same at home. Like, if I'm not feeling good about how I'm showing up for my kids, I'm not feeling, okay, why are you not feeling good? It's not about like rushing them to get them to every sports event to check all the boxes that I'm doing everything. How are we all feeling? So for me now, it's turned to, how do I feel?
Well, and you've talked before about the gut check and really getting in tune with your, your inner gut, and, even evaluating yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. And how do I feel? What am I feeling?
For me, gut check is, have I put on any weight?
Yeah. No, and the answer is always yes. No, I do. I love that. And probably goes along with that. For me, success is in everything I'm doing, whether it's professional, personal. Am I in alignment with my values? And if I'm in alignment with my values, then I am living successfully.
Right.
And as soon as I am in, I'm in misalignment, I've got to now look and go, what's going on here? Whether that's at work, whether that's at play, finding those ways. And that's why I think it's so critical that we undo the inner work, because the inner work is going to help us define what we want to see outside in our day-to-day lives. So for me, that's the really big one. And that's only in the last couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, it really comes down to, I think you talked about the checklists and, right. These were all external expectations that somehow society has sold us on, that a successful life has all these things. And I think of the world of social media today and the pressure that our kids are under, because now you want to talk about, external pressure. Well, now you have daily images and videos and programming that's telling you ought to look a certain way and show up a certain way. You even need to do your vacation a certain way. It's got to be everything's got to be an Instagram moment. Talk about external pressure to conform and to meet external standards. I don't think you can ever achieve true harmony or balance or integration or flow when you're not living your life, but you're living somebody else's. Getting clear on that, I would add to core values. I would say, like, it's also getting clear on what does make you happy. What makes it's not going to look the same for everybody. I remember hearing years ago a definition of success that I've kind of adopted and modified slightly, but my modified version, and it's currently under review, because this show and preparing for the show made me say, okay, I think I still believe that, but I need to spend some time thinking about that, because how we define success will determine how we live our lives, right? And are we making progress towards it or not? But for me, it's doing more of what I love with the people that I love. And that is both at work and at home, right? It's an integrated, it's an attempt at a more integrated approach to say, like you, I love what I do, right? I absolutely love helping leaders. I love working with organizations. I love sitting across a Zoom call from someone or face to face and watching the penny drop as we have conversations and helping them untangle some shit. And I feel like most days I'm not working. And then there's days I feel like I'm working, but right. But finding that integration for me is
and I don't want to let's talk about this for a second, because I'm sure there are a lot of people listening who will be thinking, oh, that's great, you guys. Like you guys all have it so good for that. Like, I'm stuck in this 9 to 5 job, or other people dictate my work-life balance, all of this. And perhaps it's, I know for me, making and we all went through this season where it was a choice to live the life that we're living now. Mm-hmm. And it was fucking hard.
Yeah.
Like we all took a step at some point where we left, whether it's corporate, we left, for us, the church world, we left a world, an environment, and into the unknown, into the darkness of what the future holds.
Right.
And so when somebody says, it's so easy for you guys to talk about this, this just didn't happen.
Right.
And so for people listening who are 20 years till retirement in a job they hate, that's a choice you're making. And there are other choices you can make to live that, to be able to live a life that you're enjoying, that you're welcoming, that aligns with your values, all of those things.
I love that. So what would you, and let's spend some time there, because I think it is crucial to say, again, we're at a stage where this has been a series of decisions and actions and choices over time that has led us to be in a better place from a work perspective. I would never give up the deal that I have now, right?
Right.
My commute is literally 10 steps down to the coffee maker and back up to my office, right? Like it's and so the regaining of freedom, the extra time that I have in my, where I would actually, I've been free pretty much. I only had a couple of real jobs in my life.
You and I have never had a real job.
Right. So I tell my leaders all the time, I would make a horrible employee.
Yeah.
So I've had some of them say, you should come work for me and all this. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I've been free way too long. Right. So there's no way that I could.
This line.
Oh, you could never, I'd be so unhappy. But what would you say to someone who is in that, let's say, unhappy state from a work perspective, or they're bored, or they're unhappy, they're looking for more fulfillment? Quitting your job may seem like a huge step, but what would you say to folks to take a step towards finding greater integration at in the workplace?
Well, I think it's just like, if you're thinking of doing a big career jump, I've said this before, it doesn't have to be this massive leap.
Right.
There's so many things you can do without necessarily leaving your current job. You can ask for, you might move into a part-time role. You can maybe ask for more flexibility. There's a lot of things you can do where you are to maybe bring more harmony into your space. I think one thing for me is it's what I always say to people. It's scary. Okay. It's scary as fuck to make a big leap out of corporate and to leave stability, as a single mom, what I did a year ago, I would argue most people won't do.
Yeah.
To leave all of that stability, knowing I'm really unsure of what's going to be over here. But for me, it was like the fear of staying got bigger than the fear of leaving.
Cost of staying. Even,
it's
right?
just, and even that fear of what am I, who am I becoming, staying, living in this world? I'm not happy. I'm not living for what? For a paycheck. And I don't want my kids to see me doing that. I want my kids to see me living my dream, being happy, but it's scary. And you have to embrace that fear because you have to move through it or you're not going to get through to the other side.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
I mean, I don't have a ton of extras to add other than what you said, but it's a lot easier for people to complain and be miserable and unhappy than really sitting down and getting clear. So people say okay, you're unhappy in your marriage, you're unhappy at work or whatever. Have you actually sat down? It's a lot easier to complain than it is to, okay, totally. I need to get crystal clear on what sacrifices am I willing to make? What are my non-negotiables? And to everybody's point, it is fucking hard. Yeah. I left the corporate world and then I was laid off 2 weeks after I signed papers for a new freaking home based on my income.
Right.
I had nothing. Yeah. I mean, I had a severance, but I don't care what anybody says. Your severance is, yes, you can live off it a little bit, but that's scary.
It's a temporary cushion at best, right?
But I had spent time prior to that really getting clear on what was I passionate about? What makes me happy? You want to be responsible about it, but at the same time, nothing changes if nothing changes.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to get to that point where you're having that breakdown in order to experience that breakthrough.
Yeah.
And no one's going to do it for you.
Right.
No.
No one is going to do it for you. And that's where it's at some point, if you're making a choice, and it absolutely is a choice to either stay in the chaos, stay in someone else's control, or take control of how you live your life.
Right. And taking control, again, even what we're talking about, sometimes making a move where you have to leave your current context. But sometimes it's asking to do work that is more aligned with your passions. Maybe it's asking to take on a project that's going to help you grow and stretch and get out of your comfort zone a little bit. Maybe it's taking someone under your wing at the office and mentoring them. There's all kinds of ways of infusing more purpose, more fulfillment, more meaning into your work. But I think it begins by getting clear on who I am, what I stand for, because no attempt at doing anything will work if it's not aligned to your true self, which I think most people aren't.
Or asking for help.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's a lot easier for us to just sit in our bubble and be miserable, but asking for that support, clarity, help with clarity, help with feedback. I mean, you guys are amazing coaches, and how many times you've probably had conversations with your leaders on helping them gain clarity on navigating whatever direction they're in. I'm a big believer in people, asking for feedback and, hey, I just want to, help me kind of navigate through what's going in my head. But a lot of times we don't ask because we're ashamed and we're embarrassed, and it's just easier to sit and just be unhappy.
Sitting in your misery is hard. Making a change is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Choose your hard.
There you go.
Right. Well, both are hard, but one has hope built into it. The other just more of the same. Guys, this has been an amazing conversation. I am so glad we decided before we even started recording today that we were not going to try to cover all the material in one show.
Question one done.
We got question one done. We got 9 more. So make sure, for those of you listening, tune in next week. You don't want to miss part 2 of rejecting work-life balance bullshit, finding sanity beyond the scale. We hope you'll join us for part 2, where we continue this really great conversation about finding your footing in life. And I would say probably closing words for me are it's an inside job. It's not about external circumstances. But so glad you've joined us. Remember to go to our website, livingrichley.me, where you can find all kinds of great information about our Living Richly Nation, our exclusive private Facebook group. It continues to grow, and it's just so great to watch like-minded people come together online. You'll also find great information about the 15-day Life Vision Challenge, which if you're not clear on who you are, what you stand for, this free online experience is for you. It's going to help you do just that. It's helped hundreds of people already, and we're getting such great feedback. You don't want to miss it. Finally, make sure to like, share, subscribe. Let's get the Living Richly message out there. And until next week, get out there and keep living your best life.